The other piece that a training can do and a consultant can do is how to do it. So training and books are the rules, and this is how to do it. But what a consultant is doing is teaching you the implementation. If I'm training and consulting with you, the training is one part, the consulting is another part, and the success of the work that we do is based upon how well people that we work with are successful out there on their own. We talk about tactical empathy. And again, yes, the application of tactical empathy goes across the board. The underlying purposes are different in a corporate situation than they are in a hostage situation. And they're different in a larger $100 million deal than they're going to be in a $2 million deal.
Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Derrick Chevalier, and we're going to talk about all his expertise in negotiations. So before I hit the record button, first of all, I hope I got your name right. Secondly, before I hit the record button, you told me you were an expert in a system called SNUF evaluation or SNUF negotiations. Tell us about
Right.
that and tell us about you, kind of who you are and what's your background.
Okay, my pleasure. Well, SNUF stands for Comprehensive Negotiating Strategies Universal Framework. So it's a little easier to say SNUF. Um, and it is the only universally applicable negotiation framework. It's probably the most significant advancement in negotiation theory in probably 60 years or so. Insofar as my background, I spent about 15 years with the Karis organization. So many of your guests will be familiar with them. Karis Effective Negotiating is Chester Karis is the largest negotiation training company on planet Earth. They've been around about 60 years. So Chet was a mentor. I didn't work for the company, but my company had a contract with them. So I went all over the world delivering their program. And that was a lot of my background. And then what I realized while doing training was that I was a lot better at actually implementing the training and helping other people actually take a question or an issue and apply concepts and action steps that produced an outcome. So lots of people can teach, and not everybody's going to be the same at that level. And that was not really the bailiwick of the Curious organization. They're a training company. So I decided to let that contract go. I had a couple-year non-compete. So during that year, 2 years, I did a study of all the major negotiating frameworks, read every major book out there, and discovered that there was really no actual negotiation framework that was applicable across the board, because many of the principles would work in some ways, not work in other
Right.
situations. And that gave birth to SNUF. So what I did was I looked at all of the tactics and strategies that have gone all the way back from Sun Tzu till today, all the contemporary books, and asked the question, what has stood the test of time, and then what stands exactly like it is or like it was, but what stands that needs to be revised given the fact that, for instance, when Chet started, whose mentor was Howard Hughes, they were using a mimeograph. There weren't computers, cell phones. We were not working at and the same is true for the Harvard program, right? Which is more focused on positional negotiation. And that's probably more akin to, well, M&A crosses those lines because it's transactional and it can be simply transactional, but can also be quite complex. So, snuff allows you to evaluate a situation and then choose and shape tools that are specific to that negotiation and more specifically specific to the people with whom you are interacting. And that's one of the key elements of snuff.
So inside of mergers and acquisitions, there are, in my view, there are three different worlds, right? There's the world of multi-million or $100 million, billion-dollar deals, and you're dealing with boardrooms, investment banks, investment bankers, publicly traded companies. There's a million moving parts in those. That's one set. And then there's the mid-market,
Yes.
which is the, just to say less than 100 million, but more than $10 million in EBITDA, businesses. And those both have business bankers, maybe, or may not be private, but there's still quite a few moving parts, and it's still very logical and very systematic in what needs to get done. And it's more financial than the bottom tier, which are deals under $10 million, and especially when you get down to the SBA level deals, where it's below $5 million. You're dealing with one business owner, and now it becomes
Right.
entirely emotional and a
Right.
rapport building strategy, because if you don't have rapport with the seller, the deal can fall apart. Now,
Right.
I honestly think that you still have to have rapport through all the stages, through the different, cohesive teams and stuff.
Absolutely.
But once you get more than, say, three people on the capitalization table, you start having more than three partners or two or three investors, money becomes more of a player than, are you the
Right.
safe pair of hands? Are you going to treat my brand right? Are you going to
Right.
keep the jobs local to my local community? That mindset kind of
Right.
dissolves when you start getting into these bigger and bigger companies. I
Right.
believe that the negotiation strategies have to change too. What is your impression on going from mom and pop dealing with one or two people to dealing with entire teams?
I think you just said it very well. There are very different strategies. If you're working with a larger company, the question is always, with whom are we negotiating? So at a mom and pop level, and especially if it's a family owned business, because that's another dynamic which changes everything. We are rarely negotiating with decision makers at almost any of those levels, especially initially. And the larger the deal, the more people and departments and attitudes. You've got a legal attitude, you've got the financials, and then you have timing, organization, transfers, and all of those things. Well, a lot of those elements are true across the board. What's different? What's different is the information that has to be supplied, to the seller or to the buyer at any given level and to whom. And so there's less control the larger the deal because you have less of a personal interaction with each of the ultimate people. You're not part of the conversations they're having with the lawyers or the lawyers with the CEOs, CFOs, and the finance folks. And so you only know what they tell you about what they heard, what they said, and that's true again across the board, but it's much more difficult to get at the root of that the larger the acquisition.
Over my career, I've had many cases where, negotiated purchase of real estate, negotiated purchases of businesses, negotiated the sale of items. What I've learned in the beginning, it's interesting, is I think I started off just, having some level of empathy for another human being and trying to figure out how we get to a common ground that'll make things work. and then built off of that. I've read enough books and studied things, had a pretty decent working negotiation strategy. Basically is, come down to, the old sayings: you name the price, I name the structure. If you name the structure, I name the price. All right. But a couple different things came into play there, and then I came across, and I even taught it. We owned the local RIA at the time, Real Estate Investors Association. We had a real estate education
Right.
company. I came across Never Split the Difference and seeing the difference in that, and it worked better for us. I ripped everything we were teaching out and basically taught off of his model, and then,
Right.
but even that model it works really well at our level doing these small to medium people, because basically you're looking for win-win. You're trying to defuse any type of objections you have, but you're just trying to help them get where they want to get, for the small medium
Right.
businesses. But I fear that is going to go away when I start looking at mid-tier companies, when I start dealing with multiple people. What's your gut feel on what you do? How is what you do different than Never Split the Difference? What do you think is going to happen when we take this Never Split the Difference model that we use up into those mid and upper markets?
Love that you asked the question because I'm very familiar with Never Split the Difference. In the first place, Never Split the Difference was a title book that was borrowed, if you will, from Dr. Karis's program and book, The Negotiating
Right.
Game. His third rule is don't split the difference. So 4 or 5 decades later, Chris comes along and says, never split the difference. And I think that some of what we've discussed comes into play here. My position is that both of those are very bad strategies. Let me explain why. First of all, whether it's don't split the difference or never split the difference has a quantitative built in vulnerability. And the built-in vulnerability is where you're talking about M&A or any other type of negotiation is that if I teach you a rule that says don't or never split the difference, I have absolutely taught you to give up any deal that was only going to be negotiated by splitting the difference. So you have a rule that hides from you opportunity because you have a rule that's fixed, and human beings are not fixed.
Right.
So rather than to teach people don't split the difference or never split the difference, snuff teaches people when to split the difference, how to split the difference, and the difference is, depending on who you're dealing with. So that's one of the key concepts. And then there's another with Chris Voss versus, let's say, Karis. And I use those two. If you take Chris, if you take Harvard negotiation, where the BATNA came from, we can talk a little bit about that, and Karis, I would venture to say that there is not a book in negotiation, a program, or an expert today that is not heavily borrowed from one of those three or some
Right.
combination. So that's why I talk about them so much. So Dr. Karis's background was working with the Howard Hughes Corporation in aerospace engineering, and his background was almost exclusively in procurement. So from a transactional standpoint, almost all of his material works great in a transactional negotiation. You're buying goods and services,
Hmm.
right? And the rules match that. Now you take Chris's background. I have often spoken. Now, there are many things about Chris's program. I love Dr. Karis's program, great amount of respect for Chris as well. But you're a frank person, so I find myself that to be too. So my question is for people that follow Never Split the Difference is this. I ask people in your career, and I might ask you, in your career, how many people with whom you've negotiated were dead or in jail at the end of the negotiation?
Very, very few, if any. I have to admit, there's been probably at least four or five. that were in jail when we did the negotiation because I bought real estate out of foreclosures. And we did such a large
Right.
volume, we would occasionally buy a house that was in foreclosure where the owner was in prison already.
Already. So, by contrast, my question has been, well, how does a career of 25 years where every negotiation you were in, the person you were negotiating with was either dead or in jail? How does that type of career prepare someone who's doing an M&A or who's doing a corporate or one-on-one negotiation? And the answer is, well, in some instances, there's great pace for that. But what we do in Snuff is to say, okay, in Chris's situation, there are specifics that are not there in many other types of negotiation. One of those specifics is that in Chris's situation, 100% of the time, it is a bilateral competitive negotiation. There are only two options. The person he's negotiating with will either be dead or they'll be in jail. There's no two ways about that one. And second of all, it's competitive because regardless of what Chris or anybody else says in that particular framework, ultimately, their objective is to free the hostages and do whatever they need to do, say whatever they need to say in order to make that happen. Again, that's not true in corporate or M&A negotiation. So what we did when we look at something like never split the difference is, well, what circumstances where you are there where you might take those principles and apply them? Well, if you're in a negotiation where the stakes are life and death, either figuratively or really, that would be a place to look at those tactics and strategies. If you're in a negotiation where it is purely competitive. And one of the key principles of snuff is that the fundamental purpose of competition historically is to obliterate the other side. Period. The end. That's it. Chris is either going to kill you or put you in jail. That's a metaphor on a smaller scale, right? It's to take you out or put you in handcuffs. So if you're in that mindset and there are plenty of people in M&A, I've run across lots of attorneys and investors who have that mindset. If that's your mindset, then you need weapons that are going to be sufficient to deal with that mindset. So, and then the last element is time. If time is finite in a negotiation, and for Chris, it is to get these people free as quickly as possible, and there are no other alternatives, then you would begin to say, well, these circumstances do match the circumstances of certain M&As, and the larger the deal and the more revenue and dollars that are involved in the more lives, companies, stocks, and organizations that are going to be impacted, well, the more serious the consequences and so that would be another situation in which you might look at, glean, and then evoke specific tactics and tools from that strategy.
You know, I've read it, I've studied it, I've taught it, I've interviewed his coaches. Unfortunately, he couldn't get on the show the day I needed, so I had one of his coaches on here. I would say in his book and in his teachings, he's done quite a bit to lessen that life or death, win or lose type of situation where they either got to die or go to jail, and really lean into basic human psychology. And that's the reason it was a appeal to me. I'm fascinated by, what it is. What is this condition we have of being human? Is the way I like to put it. Right?
Right, right,
We all have needs, desires, reason,
right.
egos, reasons to
Yeah,
want to feel significance. There's all these different things that come into play. I think he did a great job identifying those and softening his approach from the FBI days to what he's doing now in the corporate world. But I can still
right,
see your point where
right,
the root of it and the source of it came from that, right? So there is
right,
this,
right.
there is this life or death type of scenario. And I prefer, to be honest, after studying his book the first time, I bought a version of it that lost all the stories. Basically, it was condensed down to
Right.
18 minutes
Right.
because I don't need the stories about
Right.
FBI negotiations. I need the strategy on how to do it. And I'm a big fan. I'm an empathetic person anyway. I'm a big fan of the tactical empathy approach, where
Yes.
just really trying to understand where they're trying to get and helping them get there, so long as it's aligned with
Right.
your goals. So, and I get the topic, it's kind of a cheesy play on never split the difference. The default in most people who are untrained in any type of negotiations
Right.
is to just default going, okay, you're at 2 million, I'm at 1 million. Can we meet in the middle at 1.5 or 1.2? And they immediately
Right.
try to do that without doing anything or understanding the real underlying motive of why the guy said 2 million to start with. And in a lot of business deals, the reason the guy said 2 million to start with is totally illogical, right? Yeah, it's
Exactly.
basically, oh, my financial advisor said that's what I need for retirement. And I was like, okay, well, that has nothing to do with the true evaluation of your company,
With the
right?
financials. Right.
So
Right.
I get the concept. Walk me through the structure of, if I were to do a deal and I use your structure to negotiate. Um,
Right.
Walk me through what that is and give us kind of a synopsis of it so that we can learn this model you're using.
Okay. Thanks so much. So you made several great points. I'll speak to those as
Yep.
well. The reason I make that stark contrast is obviously to separate myself and snuff from everyone else. By contrast, when Chris was doing that for 25 years, I was doing 4 million miles of training and consulting in a corporate arena.
Right.
So my point is to say that probably the sum total of experience would be different in terms of interacting with people who are doing what we're talking about. And obviously there. So you've got to be some distinction because I think and agree with everything you said about how well he brings that down. Now, I would also say this. One of the other criticisms that I had had is that the stories in the book are the bulk of what Chris wrote. The rest of his book was written by his co-author, who doesn't have any real background in negotiation, and most of that was lifted from the Karis program because when he went out to do his research, there was no way for that he was not going to run into the Karis program. So if you took the Karis 6 rules and you applied them on that 18 minutes, what you've got is the Karis program sans the stories, right?
Right.
And so I just make those points to say it's important to know what garden you're in if you're picking
Yeah.
fruit, right? That's all. And then to make those adjustments as you did. So we talk about tactical empathy. And again, yes, the application of tactical empathy goes across the board. The underlying purposes are different in a corporate situation than they are in a hostage situation. And they're different in a larger $100 million deal than they're going to be in a $2 million deal. Because, as you mentioned, emotions and the involvement of the direct owner, especially if you're dealing with someone who built a company. You're talking about their child. They're not able to remove themselves very easily away that and then get down to EBITDA. I mean, for them, that can be offensive, right? Because that's not what they're looking at. So
I often tell people, you're not asking them to buy their business, you're asking them to marry their daughter. Right? This is personal to them, right? They built this thing.
the,
They spent as much time as building this thing as they did raising their children, right? You're asking them to marry their son or their daughter and take them away to a foreign land and never let them see it again, right? So,
Exactly. And that I love that metaphor. And so you ask to talk a little bit about walking through the snuff system. So the snuff system starts with a series of what we call omni modes. And that comes from
mhm,
omnipresent, right? So we're looking at elements of a negotiation that most people only look at cursorily. So the first of those omni modes is to look at the geographic, political, and socioeconomic background of the individuals, or if it's a company, then we're going to look at each of those of the people of the players at each level. So we're first, because that's going to impact the language, the interaction, the emotions, and that's where we're going to find the foundation for tactical empathy. Because if I look at where you grew up, and if I look at your socioeconomic status, and I look at the political system in which you've been raised, I can surmise that they have had some impact on you, generally. Then I look at organizations and institutions. Were you in the military? Were you not? Where do we have something genuinely in common? Because I also know that the school that you went through and the organization that you worked for and the kind of company that you have, or the industry or sector that you are, has a language and idiosyncrasies of its own that are part of your nomenclature. So I want to look at that. And I want to look at the institution that you're familiar with, because they have had an impact on you. The last piece of that is called per via. Now that says, how have all those previous politics, socioeconomics, and geography, organizations and institutions impact, impacted the personal and behavioral attributes of the human being that's in front of them? How have they manifested all of that? So that's step number one. So your tactical empathy is much, much deeper roots, because I'm able to get much closer to where that to what type of empathy. And here's the difference. In a hostage negotiation, we're using tactical empathy as a tool. We aren't really interested in understanding the background of that person, except to terminate the negotiation, right? In an M&A, if you're talking to a direct owner, we may actually have empathy for that person's situation. We may want to care for that company. We may have specific reasons why we're a good person to sell that company to and what we're going to do with it. And so at every level, it's going to change. And the more specific we can be, then we can choose a set of tools that are consistent with the genuine outcome we're looking for, right? So you mentioned win-win, for instance. In the snuff system, win-win is a misnomer. And the reason it's a misnomer is that if you really look at what in all the thousands of trainings that I've done, we do practice negotiations, and people will set a target, and the buyer has a target, the seller has a target, and how high do you want to go? How low would you be willing? Or in the Harvard system, that's called a BATNA,
Right.
right? What's the bottom line before you walk away?
What is it?
So
Best
the question
alternative
that
to negotiated agreement,
agreement,
BATNA. Yeah, okay.
exactly. So our question is, well, when you came up with that price, to your example, you want $2 million. Who came up with that price? The buyer came up with that price. Were you in the room? No. Do you really understand before you speak to them, or they tell you that how they came up with that price? No, you don't really know. And so that's a unilateral position within itself, right? The fact that they came up with it on their own, unilateral, one side. Now you come in with it, and you're looking at it with you're looking at whatever reason that particular business is going to work in your portfolio, and they weren't in the room when you came up with that. So people then come together and negotiate a deal. Well, ultimately, how do they determine whether or not it was win-win? It's almost exclusively based on a comparison of a goal they set independently and the outcome that they came up with in the negotiation. And then if that is a positive, they walk away and say, well, you got something and I got something. When in fact, if I've been successful as a competitive negotiator, I'm using tactical empathy to create the perception of caring and the perception of understanding. But ultimately, I'm just looking to do the best deal I can. I don't really care if you win or no. If I need to make you feel good about the deal, then sure, I want you to feel good. And if you can also walk away feeling like, yeah, that was win win, well, that's great. Perception trumps reality. You feel good about it. But as a consultant, negotiation consultant, I work with people all the time that feel good because they just got screwed.
Yeah, and I've seen that. How do you do so one of the ways I approach things is I call it deferment. I defer potential conflicts until I have deeper rapport. So here's a good I'm putting scenarios in front of you because I'm trying to learn this process you're doing.
Sure,
So
sure.
early on in the conversations with business owners, and I've got one scheduled here in the next few days, hopefully. I got somebody else trying to book it. Company's a $25 million company, way bigger than what I've been looking for, but they can only sell it to disabled veterans, somebody who has a disability, because 90%
Ah,
of their contracts are preferred defense contracts. So somebody brought me in as a partner and said, "You want to look at this because you'll fit that. We
that
need your
avatar.
disability card, right?" That said, often inside of these conversations in the first day, if somebody's been thinking about selling for a while, they have a price, and if they bring it up too soon, off, especially if it's just outlandish, right? A lot of times people will Google around and see what do accounting firms sell for, and then they see the PE level and the above firms
Right,
selling at 7x, 8x, 11x, and they think they get that, right? And
right,
unfortunately, they don't make enough money to wake up the giants, and in
right,
the lower markets, it's 2x, 3x. So, that
right,
said, a lot of times that conversation, it's not ready to be had. So, if we're on the first call, here's a
right.
good scenario. We're on the first call, we're building rapport. In the first few minutes, the owner's like, "Well, I make $25 million a year at 20% profit margin. We're doing $6-7 million a year. We want 7x, or whatever. We want
Right.
10x."
Right.
If that doesn't line up with where I think it should be, because I know how the system works, I don't ever teach them in that moment, because I'm not a teacher in their mind at that moment. I haven't established myself
Right.
as a point of authority yet. So at that point, the only thing I
Right.
can say is, "Cool, to see how we can get you there." Right? And I just leave it for, like, I purposely say, "Well, that sounds interesting. I don't know enough about your business to know whether that's a great price or not. At this point, let's see
Right.
how we can get you there." And
Right.
often the story, the how to get you there is like, you need to increase your revenue by, right? You're not quite there yet. But at a
Yeah.
later time, we can explain when I can sense that there's trust in me and there's rapport, and I've established myself as a point of authority on the topic, where or I can even find a third party they trust. There's a thing I love. I don't know if I've ever brought it up on the show. We should probably chat about, because I think you'd have some good insights into this. There's a thing I've always been able to get anything done in any company by knowing three different individuals, and we'll explain that. But at this point, a lot of times I just defer that conversation till I have a deeper rapport. Is there a better way to handle it? If somebody throws out something that's like an anchor that's just absurd, it's absurd in the moment, but you can tell by their
Right.
their voice and you call it their presence. They're not confident in it. They're not
Right.
like, "This is the number."
Right.
It's not a ride or die type of
Yeah.
statement. They're just like, "Well, I'm thinking about. Am I right by just deferring that until I have more context around the situation?"
1,000% right. Now we can put that into specific context, and that's what one of the things that snuff
Mhm.
does. It's going to put that question into a specific context and then provide some insight. So what you described and what I heard you saying is that when you hear the person say, "Yes, I want X, this is why, because we're doing," and they explain it. And one way might be to say, "Yeah, that sounds pretty good." Well, what we would suggest is that you're talking now about what we call effective communication. So what you described is one variation of saying, "Hey, that sounds pretty good." In other words, offering no resistance and no opinion. A specific way of doing that, the skill that's involved there is called reframing.
Mhm.
So and you probably do this inadvertently. So somebody says, yes, I want X and this is Y, and this is when I want it, and this is how I came to that. Well, sure, they're spitballing because if you said, sure, let's do it, they're ready to go. But they don't really know, as you said, that they're not expecting you to do that because that's not part of the culture of the M&A
Right.
dance. So if I turned to you and I said, well, Ron, what I understand you saying is that you're doing $25 million a year at 30%. You've been in business 15 years, XYZ. And then you basically repeat what you heard them say. Here's what will happen 90% of the time. You will repeat almost exactly what they said in the very same tone or as similarly as they said it. Now, conventional wisdom would have you expect that they're going to go, yeah, that's right. But what's actually going to happen when they hear themselves speak through your repetition is, no, that's not what I mean. And then, as you hear it, that that's what
Yeah.
happens. And then they're going to give you more explanation about how they got there and what they're really saying. So we suggest that people enter that phase of effective communication back and forth until the place at which the other party says, Ron, yeah, that's what I mean. Now, when you do that, what happens is the magic, because when you do that and you say, "Yeah, that's what I mean, Derek," that yes, you understand it correctly. Then what happens is they actually, more often than not, believe that you agree with them. So you reduce the barrier and open the door for that ongoing tactical empathy and rapport that you are looking to build.
If I ever build a course, and I've probably said this 100 times on the show, it'll be about rapport building. If I ever write a
Yes.
book, actually, I I've written a book, sent it off to edit, it got destroyed, and I got to rewrite it. It's called Not Two Sides, right? That's the name of the title. But basically, it's not us versus them. It's not like
Right.
it totally. It's not a negotiations book by any means. It's a rapport building book. Basically, the strategies of that. One of the things that what you just described in my world is active listening and neurolinguistic programming, basically
Yep.
of
Yep.
repeating back to them what you heard so that you're on the same
Yep.
page, is extremely
Yep.
powerful in two realms, right? One, they feel heard and understood. And two, they heard it come from a separate, like you said, they heard it come out of their words coming out of your mouth, and they start to
Right.
question, like, wait a second, I know that's what I said because you just repeated it, and that's exactly what I said. But, like you said, that's not exactly what I meant, or they'll realize the error in their things. And you gotta be really, so for those of you guys are listening, be very careful doing this because tonality and speed and cadence and everything matters when you repeat something back to them, because it can come
Right.
across either sincere, like "I heard you," or it can come across as condescending or weird if you go, like, for instance, you said, "Okay, so what you told me is you're doing $25 million a year for 15 years. You're at 25 to 30% profit margin, and you want 25 million for your company. Is that right?" If you say it neutral like that, then you're probably going to be fine. But if you come back with a little bit of your own flavor on it, and go, "You said you were in business for 25 years, and you're doing, or sorry, 15 years, and you're doing $25 million a year." And you want 25 million? Now all of a sudden you've questioned their logic. You've changed the whole premise of repeating back to them what you said, and you put them
Exactly.
on the defensive. So be real careful. Tonality and cadence, what they call in neurolinguistic program is pay, or is it called match, mirroring, pacing, lead, um,
Exactly.
right? But it
Yep.
matters, and a lot of people go, I repeated back to him. I was like, yeah, but how did you do it? Right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
there's some art to this. I love
It's
that you do
very
I
much.
I love that you do role playing. I think that's one of the biggest things people miss when they read a book
Right.
like Never Split the Difference, or or they read a book that you put out, or they go to some course and it's a 3-day seminar and all they do is sit there and listen to somebody teach them something. If
Yeah.
you don't play the game of role playing and you don't put it into action,
Right.
You won't learn these, I guess they're idiosyncrasies, these little nuances that make a huge difference, right?
Right. Eh, so you bring up a couple of things that I'll share. One, there actually is a book on rapport building. In our series, the Snuff series is built on 3 books.
Okay.
The first one is called Beyond Negotiating: From Fear to Fearless, which specifically looks at elements of fear, helping us to deal and neutralize it, understand it, so that we are more focused on getting out of our own way. The second book in that series is called Beyond Negotiating: Influence Rapport Results. And it goes through the mechanics of what we're talking about: matching, mirroring, the science of rapport, the science of effective communication, closing strategies, and some of that. The third is really the core of it, which is called Evolve or Be Slaughtered: Negotiation for the 21st Century. And the 25th, the 2025 edition of Evolve will be out, actually. It'll be up for pre-order in the next, couple of months, and then it'll be right out in January. So it's those 3 pieces together. And the second thing that you talked about, I mean, it's why you're so successful, because we haven't talked before, and yet we have a great deal of synergy. One of the things we use, and one of the is a 360 approach. So we have another acronym, and it's called ICSER. So you talked about going to a 3-day seminar and then not necessarily processing. So what I learned while I was with Karis, where over the period of 14 years, there would be somebody that was in, these are 2-day seminars, who was at it, and I'd meet Ron. And so 7 years later, Ron's at a new company, and they've sent him back to so that's his second time. Well, there were about 150 people over that 14 years I was on the road that I saw who took the same seminar up to 4 times. Now, every time I did a seminar, I would say to people, listen, if you don't get these 6 rules and take them out of the book and out of this room and into the real world, I'm not saying you wasted your money, because you can get your, 1,200 bucks back, but you've not taken advantage of the full capability of the tools. So with that 150 people over a 14-year period, I said, what about that rule 3? In every one of those cases, the person had taken 1 or 2 of those rules out of the first time they went to the course, and they had the same 1 or 2 rules at 14 years later, that they had from the first course. So when I built Snuff, we and because we're primarily a consultancy, we built a 360 approach, which says, look, you've got to take information, which is data, which, as you know, as a computer person, is inanimate. It doesn't care what you think. You have to take information and raise it to knowledge. You have to take knowledge and raise it to skill through practice and reflection. You have to take skill and raise it to a level of expertise where you are now teaching, as you said you were. You explained ICSER when you were talking about never split the difference. And you took that skill and raised it to expertise where you're teaching other people someone else's concept. And then you put that expertise into action, which you've already talked about, because you actually do deals. And that is the process that we use when we're working. Some clients are only interested in consulting. Well, if I'm consulting on a deal, I'm not training you. I'm understanding the situation and helping develop a strategy that will work best for you within the confines of our relationship. If I'm training and consulting with you, the training is one part, the consulting is another part, and the success of the work that we do is based upon how well people that we work with are successful out there on their own. That's what our objective is. It isn't to how many people I can get in a room. That certainly cost me a lot of money,
Mhm.
but it has not cost me peace of mind or heart, because my focus is leaving a legacy that'll be here long after I'm gone, and that's a lot of my focus and motivation.
There's a interesting human element that all of us do, including myself. We'll read something, we'll take the things out of it that we like, and we'll apply that, and we'll leave the rest of it as if it was wrong, right? We
Right,
don't apply the entire thing. I was an extremely voracious reader for a long time, listening to audiobooks, reading business books and stuff. I used to brag I'll read 5, 6, 7 books a month. And
right,
one of my good friends in they work inside of a lot of self-help and places where they help people come over trauma and stuff. And
right,
he said, "Yeah, but you don't implement any of it."
right,
And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "You've read, 15 books on business, but, if I asked you, what are the 48 laws, you're gonna give me 2 of them, right? If I ask you
right,
what are, if I ask you about never split the difference, you're gonna tell me about technical empathy and 1 or 2 other
right,
topics, but you're not gonna,
right,
give me the step by step." So
right,
what what it realizes, I shifted from that model, and instead of
right,
reading, 5, 6, 7 books a month, I pick some subject that I wanna learn and be really good at and become proficient in it, and I
right,
might read 3 or 4 books on it, or I might study the same book over and over again. There's a reason
right,
why I bought that Never Split the Difference with all the stories stripped out of it. The book without the stories, the audio book without the story, I think with it, it's like 5 or 6 hours of audio. Without it, it's 18 minutes. Right? You can listen to the entire structure of the
essence,
system of the book in
right.
18 or 19 minutes flat. So, that said, I don't understand, what do you think it is as far as inside of our human psychology to where we'll take somebody's system and cherry pick the 1 or 2 things that fit our needs and
Right,
implement that as if it's the whole system, and when it doesn't work, they go, "Oh,
right,
that system never worked."
right. Exactly. I find the same thing, and that is what gave birth to Fear to Fearless,
Mhm.
because the answer to your question is pain. So when the human brain hears or is approached by something that they don't understand, the brain interprets that as fight or flight, right? The same thing happens. Your brain shuts down, shuts off, and we want to run away. That's an element of fear. So learning something new, and the older we get, and there are exceptions, but the older we get, the more difficult that is. And now I'd have to say that because of social media, and you have kids at 2 and 3 years old who are being trained by phones and computers, who never actually, they're so looking for the result that they're not actually learning the skill. Like you're talking about coding, and you're talking about the underlying elements upon which you built the, skill that you have. So I had a couple of things on that. It's pain and pleasure, and that means that somebody says, "Well, like, I agree with these 3 things in the book, so there's no pain in accepting them, and they make me already right, so I can leave here and keep going, I'm doing it all right." On the other hand, when something that you meet is completely different to your thinking, you either shut down and turn it off or convince yourself that it wasn't worthwhile, because you're training yourself to believe that means that there's no point in me learning it because it doesn't work. Right? And you never actually implement it, and to save yourself that pain.
I'll even say that I did that with the Never Split the Difference program. If you really study that program, there's a lot of pre-work before you go into negotiations you're supposed to do, right?
Yes.
A lot.
Yes.
It's a heavy front load, and I'm sure
Yes.
that's the same way with most true in-depth negotiation strategies. There's a lot of you talked about, psychological and demographic and
Right.
influences and all these different things. If you really looked at it, that could be hours, if not days of work before you enter into negotiations. I've always been a kind of ready, fire, aim, lead follower,
Right.
get the hell out of my way type of guy.
Right.
So I'll do a little bit in my mind, I guess. Mentally go through the exercise of some of it, but I don't document it and sit down and do all the steps that you're supposed to do prior. What do you say to somebody who's like out there? They're only doing a couple. Maybe they're only going to do 2 or 3 mergers and acquisition deals in their life. They're going to build a company. Is it best to bring somebody in as an advisor, like somebody from your team or somebody in that can oversee the negotiations and help with it, or
Right.
really invest the time, energy, and that they need to master this? I have my own cognitive bias on this. I think that everything in life's
Right.
negotiations. So I want to study that. That's one of the realms of the world I probably should study because I negotiate with my kids every day, right?
Right.
You know.
Of everyone
Yeah.
does. Yeah, everyone did. So I'm right on board, and I'm gonna be like the surgeon we were talking about, right? You asked me, "What do I think is best?"
Mhm,
Well, I think if you're not going to learn the rudiments,
mhm,
then having a consultant, a bona fide negotiation consultant, who first will do the work with you to identify the best parts of their what they have to offer and how it fits you, and then to completely understand the difference between consulting and training. So consulting is you come and you have a set of circumstances. I do know the system, so I'm going to put those circumstances within the system for you and then ask some clarifying questions, talk about your own risk tolerances, talk about the time frame, and then I'm going to generally present a scenario A and B the same way when you go to an optometrist, A or B. You're going to feel better about one approach than another, and then we're going to drill down to a set of action steps that you can take home, and more often than not take them to the bank and as a next step. But I did want to not lose the opportunity to mention something. One of the greatest things that ever happened to me when I was in college was I was in an honors political science pre-law course, and I was sitting there talking to some of my friends, and we all thought we were so smart. And I had a professor that walked by, and then she got far enough away where she had to like raise her voice, and she said, "Derek," among this group of people, and I said, "Yeah," and I'm like, "Oh my god, this world famous professor just called my name." And she goes, "Yeah, the bookstore's right in front of me." And I said, "Yeah, what?" And she goes, "There's a book you need to get." And I said, "What is it?" And she goes, "Mortimer Adler, How to Read a Book." And of course, I never lived that down again. But the other thing that happened was I went into that bookstore and I bought that book. It's about a 550-page book that talks about exactly what you just said. It breaks down how to read different types of material and how to determine if you've actually skimmed the material versus actually learning the material, sort of what your friend was saying. So, what's appropriate is what's best for the individual. We all have different learning systems. So I again, that's why I'm so big on snuff, because what it says is come as you are. And then in this system allows you to identify your goals, objectives, background, and goals, and then to get as much of the water that you want to drink. So when we go in and do a 360 for a client, I'm on site. I go in as a team member with them and negotiate. We still offer that to clients. I then will listen to them on a call. We still do that for clients. We don't ask to listen to the other side. All we do is listen to them, and then we can match what they did. We can generally tell them what the other person said. So we have different components. So the more you want to learn, now what happens in my consulting business with medium size and some larger clients that have their whole team in there is this. They start out as consulting clients. I have a couple of today, I'll have a meeting later today, who started exclusively as consulting clients. We talk about an issue, we drill down to actions, they take the actions, we evaluate them. A year later, this particular client I'm thinking of, he said, "You keep talking about snuff and you keep talking about this rule or that rule. Where am I supposed to get all these rules?" And I said, "That's great." I said, "Because you can, in 2025, you can come into our actual medallion program and learn. And I said, I'm not consulting there. You're going to learn a set of rudiments until you know them, like the multiplication tables. And then you would not have a coder or a doctor or a pilot that didn't have those rudiments. But somehow people believe that they can do it without that training. And in M&A, they can, because you don't necessarily need those things if the objective is to be successful and have a lot of transactions. What I'll say to people is this: not how much money, just how much money you make. It's if you made a $10 million over the period of X amount of time without those skills, the question for somebody like me is, what did it cost you? What did you leave on the table because of what? And of course, you don't know because you weren't interested in learning. As you know more, you look back and you realize, my God, I left 100 grand here, 400 grand there. And maybe that's not important. But if you then come to the decision, that's not important, I'm very happy. Now you're satisfied with the outcome and fulfilled. And I don't think that's a negative thing at all. I think you got to find people where they are and help them build and sculpt, understanding that evolution is part of the process for all of us.
So one more topic I want to cover before we go on, and I prefaced this earlier. I think it's important to follow through with what I said I was going to do. There's
All right.
something I learned, I believe, oh man, it's been years now, 2000 maybe. I was out in 97. But anyway, one of the companies I worked for brought in an executive. I think he at one point was the CEO of one of the airlines. And
Right.
he did a simple drawing on a piece of paper and said, "This is how I got from being like a line level employee to being the CEO of a company." And he goes, and I've done it 2 or 3 times where I walked in into a company at a lower level, and within a year or 2, 3 years, 5 years, I'm the CEO. And he says that just there's a way to get things done. And he drew 3 circles on there. And if you think about like the Olympic Koreans, with the 3 circles
Right.
overlap. So I don't have a chart or anything, but
Right.
basically think of like the Ikigai or something like that, where you've got circles that overlap. And he said there are 3 people you need to know in any situation. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I add this to the Never Split the Difference, and I'm wondering inside of your program how you address this. But sometimes you don't necessarily have rapport with the decision maker. So those 3 circles are the person with power, the person who can make the decision. He's in this case, the business owner or the decision maker. There's a person with influence, somebody that the power guy will listen to. They trust, they love, they
Yeah.
they they really believe in that. Anything that guy says is golden. There's an influencer, and all of us have that in our lives. We have people that truly influence. If they told us something, we're going to believe it. And then there's a person with knowledge. So you have knowledge, power, and influence, right?
Right.
And if you know who those key players are in any situation, you can almost get anything done. And
Right.
in my career, I got to where I could do it. I could walk into a company, as a general manager and be senior director of all operations within a short period of time because I
Right.
got stuff done nobody else could get done, right?
Right.
Fairly knowledgeable, so I usually was the guy with the knowledge, and then I just had to go figure out who has the decision-making power to do this and who do they listen to, and then you go,
Right.
you influence the influencer, right?
Right.
That works inside of this too, right? I've often have discussions in the real estate world, even in the business world, where the business owner is the husband, but the wife is
Right.
the influencer, right?
Right.
And you realize you have to bring
Right.
the other party or the significant other, wife, husband. I'm
Yes.
not trying to gender anything here.
Boyfriend, girlfriend,
Boyfriend,
whomever. Right.
girlfriend,
Right.
husband, wife. It doesn't matter. I've had all those
Whoever. Right.
scenarios. You can't get to the level of influence by other people around them, but if you can, and you might be able to better click with or build connections with the influencer in that realm, you can get so much more done if you just know who those players are. Does your
Right.
system address that when you realize you may not be at the stature or at the level you need to get the power maker to do something? Do you identify who the key players are in this stuff and who listens to who and I guess the
Absolutely.
team dynamics or whatever? I don't know what word I would use for it, but I've done it for so long, it's just natural. I do it without even thinking about it now.
Right. Right. So I agree with you, and I think those circles in the example that you're giving are excellent. So snuff is about how to do that. So if you have 25 or 30 years of experience as you do, and you're a student of negotiation. And I'm a real estate broker. I've done almost every type of deal in real estate. I've been a broker for 30 years on both sides of the ball. So if you're like us and and you're involved and both on the learning level as well as the execution and the day to day and the teaching level as we both are, then over a period of time you can acquire a set of skills in a world in the 21st century that moves as quickly as we do, suffice to say that most of the people that are in their 40s and younger, they're never going to have the opportunity that we did to take the 20 years to learn what we learned. By the time they figure it out, the system that they're talking about and the thing they won't want to do won't even exist anymore. The statistics today are that the average millennial will have 15 to 20 different careers, and more than half of them are not even invented yet. So the idea that we grew up, it's different. So to come back, what Snuff does and what a consultant and a trainer does is I think I'm very proud of the idea that the greatest reflection of the success that we have is not what I've done and what I've made, is that I have very few clients who are not more wealthy and more successful than I am, who have started right out of college with no background or started as a director and ended up as a CEO or whatnot. That's the power for me and the just for my own, background. That's what I think is important. So the idea of it's not how to it's what you need to do, as you just described. You need to know who those 3 circles are, right? That's the what. The other piece that a training can do, and a consultant can do is how to do it. So training and books are the rules, and this is how to do it. But what a consultant is doing is teaching you the implementation. So as a consultant, it is I don't get paid for the books I've written and all of that. I've got or how much time I spend with somebody. It is that it's taken me 30 plus years to get to that point so that I can analyze a situation and come to an outcome that'll take you 6 or not you
Yeah.
independent, but editorially take somebody else 6 months or don't. And I have clients, an ex-wife that started as an assistant to the manager of a major piece of a major bank. She had a BS degree in human resources. This woman had an MBA. She was a CFA. She had 5 MBAs working for her. And within 6 years later, my wife took that job with the same BS degree that she had, and the other people were looking around and trying to figure out how did she do it. Well, she had, a resource and training and ongoing living with her, and I put her in the seminars and developed a lot of what I do by working at people. So I think it is understanding, what do I need to know? Those 3 circles. And then it's, how do I do it? Those are the books and seminars that we had trained. And then it is the implementation. What is the best way for me as an individual, given my background, skills, and interests, to very quickly assimilate the what and the how, get into action, and produce a result that is consistent and perhaps even over and above what I
Yeah.
expected I might be able to achieve.
When I show somebody that, I always explain to them, when you first start out, you're outside of those 3 circles, right? And you're trying to figure out where do you fastest fit in. Most of the time, you can fit in fastest in the knowledge circle, right? You know
Right,
something they don't know, and they can pick up that you can just demonstrate knowledge fairly quickly. But
right.
in any dynamic, your goal in building rapport is to move from knowledge to being the influencer, right?
Yeah.
To understand that other individual so well and where they're trying to go that you can apply your knowledge and your abilities to help them get there, and they get that. That's when you become the influencer. And
Right.
in any dynamics, right? When you enter into these roles, let's say a broker listed business. When you enter a
Right.
business with a broker listed business, you walk in outside of those three circles. You're not the knowledge, the owner doesn't know you as a person of knowledge. The owner doesn't know you as an influencer. You're an outside
Right.
party interested in taking over what they've built for their whole life.
Right.
Quickly, you try to show knowledge, experience, some other stuff. They'll Google you. You are who Google says you are. So you better have that lined up and have the information out there for them to find. And then fairly quickly, your goal in any of these situations, if you guys are listening out there, is to replace that person of influence. And I hate to say this, it's a competitive mode. You want to be more influential than that broker, because often the broker is going to, in most cases, in a real estate deal, and in a real estate deal is more cut and dry. In most cases, in business transactions, the broker's not the guy that has to be there and run that business for the next 25, 30 years. And the broker is
Right.
not the guy that's going to need to call that owner when things go to hell in a handbasket, because your ego told you could take over somebody's business that he's been running for
Right.
30 years and run it better than he does. And it's not true, right? You're going to have a wake up call within probably 6 months to 18 months to where you need that owner again. And if you haven't
Right.
built rapport, you're either going to have to hammer through it on your own, or
Right.
bite your own ego and try to call the guy, but you may not have that done. So I honestly
Right.
think it's absolutely critical in these situations to where you're taking over something that's a moving machine, and the mechanic that built it's retiring off or doing something else. You better know the
Right.
guy's number and have him like you enough that he's eager to pick up the phone, right?
Right.
So there's a
Right.
shift in dynamics that you have to manage and negotiate and learn to get through. And if you close, I tell people all the time, if you close a business transaction where you buy somebody's moving business and you're not a center of influence to that individual, the seller, if he doesn't truly believe in you and lean on you for answers to stuff, you probably bit yourself in the butt.
Right.
So I love what you're doing. I think that what you're doing lends to everything that that the listeners need to hear. But I didn't want to leave people thinking that they enter that in one of those three circles, because you really don't. You're kind of outside of there, and you're trying to figure out, navigate how you fit into the knowledge, power, or influence. You're not going to
Right.
in this situation. You're not going to be the decision maker. Or technically, are you're buying the company. You get to make that decision.
Right.
But in this case, where you're trying to negotiating with them, the business owner, and sometimes I'll be honest, sometimes that business owner has negated that so much to the broker that
Right.
it makes it feel like in the beginning the broker's going to make the decision, but that is almost never true, right? The broker's not going to have to pick the ink pen off the table and stroke their signature on a contract,
Right.
right? And these deals fall
Right.
apart all the time when it comes time to pick up the ink pen and put a name on paper.
Right.
When it all hits the wall, if you don't have rapport, you don't know what that owner's doing next, and you don't have him living into that future of what they're doing next, and you don't have the trust of everybody, these deals don't close. There's a reason why there's such a low close rate
Low
on
road.
M&A deals and people trying to sell their business, is they negate this whole process of building deep rapport, building trust, and helping the other person really feel comfortable with the situation.
Right. I think what you just said was a master class. And if your listeners would listen, if they listen to nothing else that we've shared, that is a golden nugget. The idea of understanding that all of these small, minute mistakes that we miss along the way, the moment that you realize that you missed them is that moment at which an owner is required or supposed to pick up that pin, because that's when all their doubts and questions and all of the mistakes and the misrapport and the miscommunication all come down to that moment because they see their life flowing through
Mm.
that signature. So I think that your words are phenomenally important, and I'd encourage people to take heed and listen and to understand what those roles are and then where they fit in those roles. And the other thing I'd leave with this is that we talk about being an influencer, right? And One of the key things in stuff is that we're big on definitions of words. So many people don't actually understand that the word influence comes from the 14th century, and it referred to an ethereal fluid that came from the heavens and caused people to take actions. Cupid and the arrow, that's an ethereal explanation example of influence. But influence by definition is the ability to have an impact on the behavior, thoughts, or actions of a person, place, or thing. Here's the kicker, without their being aware of it. So influence is not persuasion. Influence is the ability to plant those seeds within the relationship, the dynamics of the relationship, all the way through, so that when the owner picks up the pen, it is that ethereal influence that causes him to pick up the pen and complete a signature. And that's the objective in an M&A.
We're running out of time. So, how do people get a hold of you? How do people reach out and work with you? What's the best way? How do you want people to reach out to you?
Thank you so much. Just jump on the LinkedIn profile, Derrick Chevalier. That's an easy one. And from there, they can get to the website, or they can go to the website, which is just h-c.com. And I'd really like to invite your audience. We offer a 30-minute, no BS, no obligation consultation to just have people ask a question, because it's easier to buy a candy bar when you know what it tastes like. To talk, and a lot of times we can provide value within that 30-minute call, and just find out what's going on, ask a question, get some insight. But from the website, you can certainly, or go on the internet, type in my name in the internet, Google, you'll come up with plenty of ways to get me. And it'd be such a privilege. And if they do, I'd really be honored if they'd mention you and our show, because it's been a privilege for me. I really have enjoyed our conversation and learned a lot, and somehow we ended up kindred spirits. So I
Yeah.
love that.
All right. Well, thank you. We're gonna wrap it up. Call the show. Hang out for a few seconds afterwards, and we'll call this a show. I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between 5 million and 30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT-enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.